And welcome back to NostalgiaCast, where we take a look at your childhood favorites to see if they stand the test of time or if they're past their prime. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we'll be talking about the 1985, I wouldn't call it a classic, I wouldn't call it a cult classic, I would just call it kind of, well, you look on the internet and people call it pure nightmare fuel. So it's the 1985 pure nightmare fuel movie, Return to Oz. But this is obviously our Halloween episode. I saw that last week, but I noticed that you got some wonderful Halloween decor. Was that you that set that up?
No, that's all my wife's handiwork. But however, I did put the movie up. I did that. That was me. So.
All right. So you're contributing, right? What's she complaining about?
It's a long movie, though. It's a long movie.
Well, that's as close as we can get, right? I don't, Return to Oz, I don't even have that in my collection. I've got my Spider and my Wizard of Oz up, so, we're kind of the same. Anyway, we'll talk about that since this is obviously our Halloween episode, but before we do, let's go ahead and recap what we talked about last week. We talked about the cult comedy classic Better Off Dead. How did we come down on Savage Steve Holland's coming-of-age teen classic, Johnny?
Well, I think we both agreed it was worth remembering. We had a lot of fun watching that one again, revisiting that one. I kind of was making the point that I didn't like how movies of today or comedies of today tried to go for shock value, whereas back in the 80s, it seems like more comedies were just trying to be funny and trying to make you laugh. And so I appreciate that it was trying to make me laugh and not so much trying to shock me into laughing like the hard R comedies do today. And then, of course, you brought up the point that it was satirizing other 80s movies about teen, coming of age films and that kind of thing. And so we had a lot of fun. And like I said, we both thought it was worth remembering. So,
right. Well, that's two episodes in a row. We were just kind of giggling our butts off at all the dialogue we were remembering, right? We did have to record Better Off Dead a second time because we ran into some technical glitches. But I thought in the meantime, before we recorded that second time, I put some feelers out on Twitter and Facebook to see if anybody that's following us, if they wanted to chime in with some of their favorite lines of dialogue from Better Off Dead, see if they wanted those read online. So online, on camera. So I've got a few of those right now. I'll just go ahead and read them. Jeanette M., a Twitter friend, she says, love this film, so many good moments. She says, I want my $2 quite often. Gidget V, she says, what is that? She said actually it's not Gidget V. She's the one that she's commenting here. Anyway, it was Anthony S. He says, what the line that I really laughed at was that I've been going to this high school for 7.5 years. I'm no dummy. Let's see here. We also, on Facebook, we had some comments. Christy J, she says, your line that you said, go that way really fast, if something gets in your way, turn. Justin K, who we've had on as a commenter before, says, gee, I'm real sorry your mom blew up, Ricky. Adam M, which is kind of a running joke here. We either have Adam McCune or Adam Merkley. And what is the joke? If it's Adam McCune, I just don't read his comment, so we'll skip that. Just kidding. Adam McCune says, he says, do you realize the street value of this mountain? I like that one. My friend John Samuel says, French bread, French fries. And again, Tawny S commented on the I want my $2. So that seems to be the classic line that everybody remembers. But yeah, we obviously had a great time. I wanted to continue that, so I don't know if it came across that Better Off Dead was the first time I'd seen it, even though I had it ingrained in my mind. And for this week, you hadn't seen Return to Oz.
That's right.
So we definitely want to talk about that. But before we do, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
This summer, Walt Disney Pictures presents a motion picture fantasy adventure beyond your fondest imagination. You'll be transported miraculously back to the enchanted land of Oz, that magical kingdom beloved by young and old for generations.
It's just a yellow brick.
No, Bellina, you don't understand. This was the yellow brick road.
You'll share with Dorothy Gale the shock of finding everything mysteriously changed.
What's happened to everybody?
And you'll delight with her discovery of 4 wonderful new friends who band together against a wicked queen and the dreaded Gnome King. This is the Oz you haven't seen before, and this is the Oz you'll want to visit again and again. From Walt Disney Pictures comes a whole new world of entertainment.
Why don't we just fly back to Kansas?
Return to Oz.
All right, so Return to Oz, 1985, directed by Walter Murch. Big history with this movie, I guess, just to go right into it. And it's kind of I do this all the time, backdoor into conversations. But when we have movies that are rightly considered classics and that are part of the lexicon or the conversation. When I started getting addicted to movies, obviously we've talked at length and in depth about how I was basically raised on movies. My mom was raising me by herself, and as a Tupperware dealer, she had no choice but to leave me with movies, and movies were my babysitter. Had other moms that knew I liked movies, and so they would take me to movies. That was just the way to keep me busy or entertained, so I wouldn't bother people, I guess. So I was always into movies, and I was really big with that. But when I was in high school and in the 90s, kind of toward the end of my high school years, that's when I started like studying film, and that's when I started watching movies made in the 30s and the 40s and being familiar with silent movies. I started educating myself on everything movies, not just, what a lot of people do these days, which is just to study movies that were released within the last 10 years. I wanted to get a whole history of what movies were and what the cinema was. And so that's where I just got addicted to it. And I studied everything, and I started watching the classics, the Citizen Kanes, the Casablancas, the Lawrence of Arabia's, the Kubrick, the Fellini, the Kurosawa, the Hitchcock, just everything that I could take, I would just eat up. And I could see, like, Citizen Kane, I understand, and I got it. It's just one of those things that you vibe into, and you either get it or you don't, like Ceiling. What's the big deal? And you have to appreciate it for the time it was made. But, some movies like that I could really get into, but there are other movies, a select few movies that I couldn't get into. I know a lot of people can't get into the foreign stuff because they have to read the subtitles. And again, that's something they have to get used to. Mm-hmm. But there are just a handful of movies that I just didn't get. And Wizard of Oz was one of them. I was never impressed with it as a kid. It was never something that did it for me or spoke to me on a personal level. But again, when I was trying to soak up all these movies, and I was going to college again to become a film critic, like we talked about before, there was a time where one of my film classes decided to sit and watch Wizard of Oz. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get over myself and I'm going to appreciate it because I'm able to appreciate all these other movies. And just within the first 10, 20 minutes, I was like, I don't get it. Like, I was, in my 20s, I still didn't understand what this Wizard of Oz thing was. I think with that, Wizard of Oz is just a movie that you have to see at a certain age for it to work its magic on you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess I would to an extent. Like you, I didn't really get that one either. It didn't really do anything for me. I remember watching it and getting bored. Like, as soon as the monkeys came into the play, like, I just didn't care anymore. And I just lost interest completely, and I stopped wanting to watch it. And I wouldn't really want to watch it again until the wizard at the end showed up, and that was where it got kind of interesting again. But when the monkeys came in, I was just like, I'm done. I can't watch it anymore. I can't watch flying monkeys, But anyway, so I understand. But I wanted to say this too, because you mentioned when you started studying film, it's kind of the same thing that happened to me when I first started watching movies as a kid. It was just to enjoy the movie. It was just to have fun and experience it. And I didn't really think much about it until I started auditioning for plays and started becoming interested in acting and then film came along, and I was like, oh, maybe we can, make some movies, and then we started doing that. And that's when it really started to hit home for me as well, like in high school. And it was like, and this, you and I started going to movies together, and we'd go to everything that came out. Every week we'd go to something new, whatever it was that came out, we were seeing it. And that's when we really started to kind of like appreciate film on a different level. So that was kind of interesting that you said that.
Right. And so again, you and me too. I mean, that's the way we were able to bond. It's just something that happens. But I think going back and talking about Wizard of Oz some more, like you said, it's just something that you have to, understand and get the magic of it. And I think I was too old by the time I decided to really focus and see what I could take from it. I just think that you can see the makeup coming off of the witch. You can see, the zipper on the lion's, outfit, and I just didn't buy any of it. And the munchkins and everything. And obviously, I appreciate it as a piece of film. I like that it was shot in sepia. Victor Fleming or whoever uncredited directors were taking control of it. And then when she opens the door after the tornado and she steps into that Technicolor World of Oz, I get that's amazing. That must have been like a mind blower, kind of like going back to our first episode with the jazz singer with the Al Jolson version and having him say, wait a minute, you ain't seen nothing yet. That must have been a mind blower for people. Not that Wizard of Oz was the first color movie ever made, but just to go to sepia and then go to this other world, and you do, and I get it. You emerge into a new world with the yellow brick road, and again the Munchkins come in, and the Glenda the Good Witch, and all that stuff. I get it. I get why that's so magical to people.
Yeah, I can still appreciate it as well on a filmmaking level. I can still appreciate what they did, and I know it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of creativity, and I understand and I appreciate all of that. But for me, for some reason, the story, I get bored with the story. I get to a point where I just don't care anymore, and I can't even keep my attention focused on what's happening. I just totally lose it, and so that's why Wizard of Oz is lost on me.
Right. I think it's just seeing the seams. I can't explain it. I think either Richard Corliss or Richard Schickel for Time or Newsweek, one of those, when the Star Wars movies came out in the special editions, he reviewed them, and his first line in his review was, "On this night in May 1977, I officially got old." And he goes on to describe how everybody in that audience watching Star Wars in 1977 were just enraptured by it, and he was watching it kind of detached, like he didn't understand. And it was a good review because, again, he could have taken the Roger Ebert, Gene Siskel view and been totally negative against the movie and saying only nerds will like this. But he watched the movie and he was like, I get that this is something to appreciate, but I'm just too old for it. I think that was my Wizard of Oz moment. So again, I never had that deep connection to the movie, and I don't remember specifically. I remember the Mombiis scene specifically, watching it in the theater, but I don't remember. I think I remember going to see it as I think I was probably 7 or 8, and I wasn't enthused by it because, again, I'm not a big Wizard of Oz fan. And I think with Return to Oz, I don't know if I liked the movie so much as I bought the world more than I would have bought it than I bought it in the 1939 version. I'd read L.Frank Baum's book since then, and again, I keep doing these tangents. When the Harry Potter movies came out, I didn't feel like they came alive until the Alfonso Cuarón Prisoner of Azkaban movie, because then it was like, when you read a book, you get it in your imagination what the world looks like, and if the movie's doesn't match what you envision when you're reading, then it doesn't work for you. And that's what the first 2 Harry Potters were like. Watching Return to Oz, I remember the Mombiis scene, and I remember being not so much enraptured by it, but caught up in the world. It was persuasive in a way that the 39 version wasn't, having grown up on it. And I didn't see the movie again. Again, that Mombiis scene is ingrained in my brain, so I remember that. But going all the way and skipping 20 years into the future and watching Wizard of Oz, and again catching it going, yeah, I'm not going to get this movie. I appreciate it. I understand what it's doing. I know Judy Garland gets a lot of appreciation, but I just couldn't stand her in that movie. She walks around going, oh, like I think she's doing like a Jimmy Stewart impression or something. She seemed too old to be acting like that. And I think another difference is Fairuza Balk in this one. She was 10 when they shot it. She feels more like the Dorothy of the books. Dorothy of the books was anywhere from 5 years old to 10 years old. And so I think that fit a little bit better. You mentioned that you hadn't watched the movie before. This is your first time watching Wizard of Oz, right? Return to Oz, sorry.
Yeah, this was my first time seeing it. And I have to be honest, I wasn't really excited about sitting down to watch it. And so I procrastinated, I put it off, and finally, just like an hour before this started, I made sure to watch it. But yeah, for some reason, I just was like, oh, I don't want to watch that one. I just don't know what it was about it. Maybe because I thought it was going to be a lot like Wizard of Oz, and I wasn't looking forward to sitting there being bored, trying to take notes, trying to find something interesting to say about it. But yeah, I mean, I watched it and I enjoyed it for the most part. I mean, I can say I kind of liked it. There were some things I thought were well done. I think, like you mentioned, Fruza Balk, this being her first movie, I thought she was really good as Dorothy. I like her as a young Dorothy. But my first question was, why, if this is a continuation of the first movie, why is Dorothy younger in this one?
Right.
You know what I mean? In this movie, I don't understand that. But she did a great job. You know.
Okay. Well, maybe we should talk about that first. Again, I don't know. I think it was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the longest time in between movies, you know, like a 46-year gap or something like that. And again, I listened to a commentary on the movie this morning, and it's funny when you listen to commentaries on movies, it kind of helps you focus on your opinion a little bit more, especially when because for the first 15 minutes, I'm not going to tell you the name of the podcast, but the three people that were listening, they just couldn't get it through their heads. If this is a sequel, why is this happening? If this is a sequel, why is that happening? If this is a sequel, how come this doesn't match? And I think even though it does, I mean, they planned it as a sequel. They had the rights. I think the Baum books were in public domain. And so, Disney grabbed them in the 50s. So they had the rights to it and they were about to expire. And that's when Walter Murch, they were brainstorming with the studio head. And he said, I want to do another Oz movie. And they're like, well, we're about to run out our option on this. So why don't we do that? And so they planned it as a sequel. But I think the issue is it's not really so much a sequel to that movie as it's based, because Baum wrote a series of, I believe, 14 books, like with the Oz books. And so it's more an adaptation of The Marvelous World of Oz and Ozma of Oz. It takes those two books as inspiration. So yeah, it's a sequel, but I think it's a spiritual sequel. I don't think it's like, kind of like Evil Dead 2. It's a Halloween, so why not? Let's compare it to Evil Dead 2, right? Evil Dead 2 it's more of a remake than a sequel to the first Evil Dead. It's just a different kind of look at it. It's more of a comedic take, but the story is mostly the same. I mean, like, you would ask yourself, why are Ash and his friends going back to the same cabin where all this trouble started? You'd ask yourself that. I just think I don't think it's like a direct sequel, like Back to the Future Part 2 would be a direct sequel, or Die Hard 2 would be, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies are, I don't know, maybe that's my question for you. Do you think that we're too wrapped up? Do you think the Marvel Cinematic Universe has kind of spoiled us as far as we think everything should be connected?
Well, maybe. I don't really follow the Marvel Universe that closely, but I can see how that would kind of taint our view of things. But if you just look at it like, hey, maybe it's just another take. Maybe it's just another, it's the next chapter in the story, but maybe it's just somebody else's interpretation of it. Maybe it's just a different way to look at it. If you look at it like that, you can enjoy the movie a lot more than if you just like, well, all these questions are unanswered about why things don't add up.
Right. I think after a while, you just kind of have to, we talk about that with movies all the time. We have to understand what it's trying to do instead of what we want it to do or what we expect it to do. And so that, again, listening to that commentary, it was hard for me because it's like, guys, just let it go. It's not that big of a deal. Just kind of go with the flow, so to speak. But the thing, and this is where we'll start talking about it. What fascinates me about Return to Oz, other than, and actually, let me just ask you, did you buy the world of Return to Oz more than you bought the world of Wizard of Oz?
I don't know. I'd say it's about equal. I wouldn't say I bought into one more than the other. It's still a fantasy world. It's still, this fantasy movie. So I was able to go, okay, this is, what the world they're presenting to me, so I can accept that. I didn't really think one was better or worse than the other, though.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I apologize if I already mentioned this, but like I was saying, reading the Baum books in between watching Wizard of Oz the first time as a kid, this version of Oz, kind of the and we'll go into it a little bit, but this version, especially at the end when they're back in the Emerald City and it's back to, full potential and back in working order, it's garish and it's colorful. It just matched in my brain closer to what I imagined Oz being from the books. So when I read the books, and I haven't read all 14, I don't want people to think I'm that in that nerdy doing that. But I've read enough of the books that whenever I would read it and they would explain things, I'd be like, oh, I can see that in my head. And so I don't know if I had that reaction watching Return to Oz in a theater, but watching it this time again in full for the first time since '85, I thought, yeah, this matches much more closely to what my imagination told me Oz would be. What fascinates me not just about the world is the man that made this. We mentioned him, Walter Murch. He's a very famous film editor and sound designer. In fact, the word sound designer was coined just for him after he worked with Francis Ford Coppola on Apocalypse Now, which we talked about in our last episode. He worked with George Lucas. He did THX 1138. He did American Graffiti, the sound for those, editing those. He worked for, like I said, Coppola, one of my favorite movies, Apocalypse Now and The Conversation with Gene Hackman, two Francis Ford Coppola movies released the same year in 1974. It blows my mind. The Conversation it fights with Apocalypse Now for my favorite Coppola movie, but the way that the sound is used in that movie, movies are inherently visual, but Murch was able to overlay the sound, and the sound became part of that world and that the protagonist's world. And so yeah, just seeing the way it overlapped, it's just a movie that I'm in love with, every frame and every sound. So I know he did that. Later he went on and Unbearable Lightness of Being for Philip Kaufman. He did, I think he won an Oscar for English Patient, Anthony Minghella. Most recently he did Tomorrowland for Brad Bird. So he's a very prolific staple of film. And so it's fascinating. This is his directorial debut. This is the only movie they'd ever made because the movie cost something like $30 million and only made $11 million. So again, I don't know how many, like the last Better Off Dead didn't make any money. We seem to cover a lot of movies that don't make a lot of money. I think Batman and A Few Good Men kind of broke from that tradition when we covered it. But it's one of those things. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned The Conversation, because when we were studying sound design, when I was studying film in college, that was the movie we studied, The Conversation. That's one of they always brought up, and we had to watch that movie and pay close attention to how the sound design was in that movie. So it's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah. So again, you watching it, there's a reason that movie is studied. And so I think with Return to Oz, like I said, he was able to grab the rights, and he made this, like, not so much a sequel as a direct sequel, as much as a spiritual sequel. And going back to it, when they were filming, I think with Bellina the chicken and all, the animatronics and the costumes, and they just ran into trouble, and Disney, again, one of the podcasts I listened to just recently on the movie, it's funny that Disney and a lot of studios, when they run into trouble on movies, they kind of replace their directors. I know it happened just recently with Miller, and on Solo, A Star Wars Story, they replaced them with Ron Howard. So yeah. So Disney has a way of doing that, and again, they did that with him, and they fired Murch 2 weeks in because he just wasn't impressing them. And so it's funny that he turned to, so he went to George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola and Steven Spielberg, who he was friends with and worked with, and said, hey, could you help me out here? And Lucas is able to go to Disney and say, look, we're going to step up for this guy. We know he's going to do a good job. If he happens to mess up, George Lucas, will step in and take the reins from it. So there's a little bit of history. But so he had friends and he had a circle of support. And I just think he had a vision for this movie that it's unique. I mean, whether you like the movie or not, you kind of walk out of it going, well, I don't know if I'd ever seen something like that before. I don't know if I would have, watching Wizard of Oz sequel, I don't know if I would have taken that kind of track for it. And so just going right into it again, the movie that I noticed, the first thing that I noticed is it's a lot like the, story-wise, it's a lot like the Alice in Wonderland remake that Tim Burton just came out with, 2010 or whatever, where the main character, she has a relationship with Wonderland / Oz, but she goes back to Wonderland and Oz and finds out that it's been taken over and it's a different world, and the Mad Hatter's locked up somewhere, or / the Scarecrow and her friends, or it's all the same kind of story beats. But then also thinking of that, there is, and I tried to look this up, I don't know if there was a subgenre of kids movies or fantasy movies, but the closest I could find, I believe, was from, let me find my note here. A film school reject, Scott Biggs, called it the fantasy travel subgenre, where it's a character that kind of gets swept up and kind of delves into another world that they're unfamiliar with. Which, of course, we mentioned Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, again based on books. Chronicles of Narnia does that. We covered the Phantom Toll Booth with Ken, and so that I remember specifically. In that movie, the kid goes from live action to animation, in that shot where he takes the car, right? And he delves into this world where he meets characters like the wizard or like the scarecrow, or, he meets all these. Labyrinth, we covered that one. This movie had a lot of similarities to Labyrinth, especially that ending.
I made that comment. I said the style of the movie was reminiscent of Labyrinth and Dark Crystal. That's kind of what it reminded me of as I was watching it. So
yeah, absolutely. Never Ending Story, which is on our banner. That's another one that ties in with that. The Matrix, definitely The Matrix with Neo's journey in there. Spirited Away, the Miyazaki movie. Pan's Labyrinth just recently. So there's a very specific genre that this kind of followed. I just thought it was going from, well, this is kind of like the Alice in Wonderland remake to, well, then it's also the original book is like Alice in Wonderland. It's like Chronicles of Narnia. It's just weird that all these authors have the same kind of idea for a story like this. Did you pick up on any of that, or like you said with Labyrinth?
Yeah, definitely. I think I definitely noticed that as I was watching it. It would remind me a lot of those kind of movies, and so I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that was interesting. I thought it was just throughout history. There's just a subgenre of these movies that do that. The first thing that you notice with this movie is how dark it is. It starts off with Dorothy in a daze, and I just thought it was interesting that she can't get sleep. And during that time, you had to work. That was your life. You had to work, and you had to raise crops, and you had to, raise chickens, and you had to farm. Otherwise you would starve. Yeah. And so the fact that Dorothy isn't working and she can't sleep, and Annie M is like, I can't have you helping me because you're not sleeping. And the solution for that is to take her to an asylum to give her electroshock therapy.
Yeah, shock therapy.
You're like, whoa. And so, but again, that's not out of the ordinary. I mean, back in, I go back to the Salem witch trials. They couldn't explain why these women were acting so strangely. And so they just, well, she's a witch, burn her at the stake. That was their answer for everything. And so, but the thing that I thought was interesting with this is Dorothy's obviously having trouble sleeping because of the tornado. I think the movie takes place 6 months after, but her uncle, Henry, that was his name. Her uncle Henry, he's got a broken leg, and she mentioned that, but Annie M goes, no, it's mended. And so, and even Bellina the chicken, Dorothy goes out and says, if you don't start laying eggs, Annie M is going to stew you up, right? And so Dorothy's traumatized by Oz or the tornado. Bellina's traumatized. Uncle Henry is traumatized. They threaten Bellina.
The chicken is traumatized.
Yeah, the chicken, right? She can't lay eggs. So they threaten her with death. They don't threaten Uncle Henry with death, but they're like, oh no, Dorothy can't work properly. Let's take her and shock the hell out of her, right?
Yeah.
So that's obviously very dark. I guess my question with that is and we'll talk about it some more because there's so much darkness in here. When you think of kids' films, do you think, or do you appreciate movies that have a darker edge? When you were a kid and you grew up and there were these movies that had this darkness to them, did those movies stick with you more than a movie that's happy-go-lucky and, all bunnies and fluffy chickens? What do you think?
Yeah, I responded to darker movies as a kid. I grew up on horror films, and horror was my genre when I was first getting into movies. And so I always noticed the darker side of things, and I always kind of appreciated those kind of things. I love dark comedies. I love, I'm not so much into horror anymore, but I'd still, once in a while I'll watch a horror movie. But I do definitely see the darkness. And watching it tonight, my kids were in and out, and they were kind of coming in and out of the room as they were watching it. And they, one of them actually started crying and got kind of scared at the scene where the gnome king, the rock monster guy, was getting ready to eat the pumpkin.
Jack Pumpkin.
What's his name? Jack Pumpkin, yeah. And she started crying, and so we were like, "Oh, is this too dark for her? Is this too scary?" So we had to kind of pause it and kind of make sure she was okay before we kept watching it. But anyway, yeah, I definitely see that darkness, and I can appreciate that. I like it when they have that kind of edge, but I know it's not for everybody. But I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, that was one of the things when you read the critics, their reaction to it is the darkness in here. I think it just rubbed them the wrong way. I think they were expecting, since it was hyped up as a sequel, a direct sequel to Wizard of Oz, I think they were expecting something a little brighter. And then to have this girl get taken to an asylum where you can hear screams of the patients going on in the background. And then they strap her to that gurney, and you know what's happening. It's interesting, something that does tie in with, I know that the farmhands in the original Wizard of Oz, they ended up being the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion and things like that. So that's what happens here too. When she goes in that asylum, the Dr. Worley, who's played by Nicole Williamson, he also plays the Gnome King later.
Okay.
The nurse... what was her name? Started with a W. Wilson, Nurse Wilson, played by Jean Marsh, who was in Willow, playing Bab Morda in there. She also plays Mombi later. And there's a part where they take Dorothy out and put her on the stroller, and there's he has a word name, Pons Mar, is one of the assistants putting Dorothy on that gurney, and then he turns out to be later the lead wheeler. And so they are taking that. What I thought was interesting from the outset is, also, you have the girl in the hospital who's obviously not a physical presence, unless I thought it was interesting when she's strapped to that gurney and she's able to get out. How is she able to get out? Because the girl helps her, right? Which is kind of a nod back to The Shining, where the only thing that you in that movie is something paranormal is going on is when Jack is able to get out of that pantry that he's locked in. I think the bartender helps him out, so you know that something's going on there. So again, did you get that? Was that heavy-handed, or was it very subtly handled, the girl not being a presence?
I really didn't understand the other girl, and in the beginning, it wasn't until the end where I was like, okay, I guess she's the Queen of Oz. But in the beginning, I was kind of like, who's this person, and and where'd she go once she went to Oz? She was just gone. Like, she was in the river, and then she wasn't in the river, and then it was just Dorothy with the chicken. You know what I mean? So it was like, what happened? So that confused me. So I didn't really get it at first.
Right. Well, the thing is, like, kids obviously have imagination and they can create these worlds. My question was, how disturbed is Dorothy? Because one of the articles that I read on the movie recently is they suggest that Dorothy has a split personality. And so she's able to see this blonde girl. And then later in the movie where Ozma comes, you know how she sees Ozma in the mirror and she's able to pull her out? So I don't know. We'll get to that, the psychology of the movie itself. So it's interesting that they suggest that stuff. Again, when she goes on that, the box, whatever, or the what is it? What did she travel in to get? It was like a shelf or
like a little cage, like a little raft cage thing. Is that what you're talking about? On the river?
Well, something that you put a baby in, like, anyway, so she travels and she makes it to Oz. The thing that I first noticed when Bellina starts talking to her and they're going to get out and she's like, oh no, it's the desert, right? We can't, step across it. We have to walk on these rocks. Right. And so when she does that, if we stay off the rocks and we stay off the sand, that is something that kids do. That reminds me of what is the Netflix show, The Floor is Lava.
Lava, yeah. So
that's stuff that you probably did as a kid. There's a lot of kids' logic going on in this movie, which when you watch it, you're like, well, that's convenient.
Is that anything that is brought up in the first movie? I don't remember anything like that being talked about. The desert and that whole thing. Was that ever talked about in Wizard of Oz? I don't think it was, right?
No, not that I know of. That wasn't brought up. I think...
Was that just in the books?
Yeah, I think it was just in the books. I'm trying to look. Anyway, yeah. So in the original movie, The 39, they suggest, it's an idea that she imagines the whole thing, but the way that the movie is presented to you, it's very persuasive. So you feel like, oh, she's actually going to this place. The fact, and again, they try to tie it in because her farmhands and her friends are the characters in the movie. So, but yeah, like, you would watch the movie and go, well, that's convenient. Or, when she ties for the Gump, she's able to tie, let's tie these two couches together and we'll put feathers as wings and we'll use a broom for a tail. That, again, is kids' logic. That is something that a kid would do And it's the same thing when the Wheelers come out and they chase her and she's, oh, I magically have a key that I picked up before. I'll just use that to get in this door. There's a lot of that going on that after a while you start thinking, well, she's imagining it. I mean, that's what a kid would do when they're making up a world as they go. Also tying in with Murch being a sound designer, did you notice that the gurney wheels are the same sound that the Wheelers make later when she's in Oz?
No.
Okay, so that ties in. I thought it was interesting. There's a part where she's talking with Whirly, and she's explaining what Oz is, and she's talking about she sees the blonde girl, and she kind of phases out a little bit, and then you can hear the doctor talking a little bit more. And he's talking and you can't really understand. And then all of a sudden he says the word Dorothy and it's as clear as day. And that's what catches her attention. I thought that was another interesting. And again, coming from Walter Murch, it would make sense that he'd play with sound like that in a way. So
one of the first things that, sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the first things that I noticed while watching it was the music. When you talk about sound, the music stood out at the beginning because I didn't think it fit quite right in the beginning. I didn't really understand the mood he was trying to create with the music that was going on. And it wasn't until later on that the music started to actually fit with what was happening in the story. So in the beginning, I was kind of like, it was almost unsettling. So I was like, this music is not fitting. I didn't think that it almost sounded like it was too happy or too jovial of a music for what was really going on. So it was confusing to me. But then it got, the story progressed, the music got better. I also noticed it got a lot louder. Like it got really loud. And I was like, why is the music so loud? I turned the volume down because the music was so loud. So I don't know if that was on purpose or not, if they just like purposely raised the level of the music in these certain scenes just for like, to heighten the intensity or whatever. But I think it worked. It kind of woke me up while I was watching it. But yeah, so the music didn't fit at first, but it did later on as the movie went on. So I noticed that right away.
So you kind of got the gist of, it started working on you as the more the movie went.
Yeah, because I was critical at first. It's like, music's not really fitting. It's not really what I would expect to hear in a movie like this. And then as it went along, it started to fit better. And I was like, okay, I guess they're going somewhere with it. I still don't think the beginning works. What you hear is for the score in the beginning, I don't think it really works that well.
Well, maybe it doesn't work because, again, when Dorothy goes to Oz, is that a Princess Bride thing? I think we talked about that before where the grandson, he's imagining the world that the grandfather is reading to him. And so I think I commented, it's either on a podcast that we did before or in our conversations, but it was, I thought the music is very cheesy and it sounded electronic. But then when you think about it, you're like, that's what a kid would imagine that music sounds like. He wouldn't really imagine a full orchestra. I don't know. Maybe he would if you're growing up in Star Wars, things like that. And that's obviously.
I wouldn't say that the music was kid-like. Actually, it got more, and it was more intense. It was more intensified as it went on. It actually got more. It was scarier. You know what I mean? It kind of like set the moods and tone a lot better. In the beginning, it was like it was trying to project this happy environment, and like you said before, it was kind of a darker environment. She was, traumatized. Henry's traumatized. Chicken's traumatized. So all these things, but the music didn't really fit. Didn't really fit the mood. So maybe it was on purpose. Maybe it was trying to make some kind of jointed, eerie feeling or something like that. And I guess it kind of worked if that was what they're trying to do. But I still don't think it really fit. I would rather not have any music and just watch them do their daily things and just kind of get to know the characters with no music. Don't try to tell me how to feel right away. Let me kind of get to know the characters. Let me kind of get into the story first. Don't try to, with the music, tell me what I should be feeling, because I don't think it worked in those first couple scenes.
Yeah, I guess I agree with you. It kind of unnerves you. That David Shire doing that music, he also did the music for the conversation, where Murch was able to grab him from. Like going back to the Princess Bride, do you think it, without music, or if it was a different kind of music, you're right, like trying to make you, as soon as Dorothy goes to Oz, I think that music becomes more appropriate because it's seen through her. And so maybe having a difference in there. One of the thoughts that I had watching the movie is it was a very dreary looking movie. And again, I felt like that was I was criticizing it that way because at least the original Wizard of Oz had that Technicolor blast that took you to a different world. But the way that this Dorothy, like I said, I don't know how disturbed she is or how traumatized she is. This might be how she imagines the world. Her real life is decrepit and her real life is run down and it's sad. And one of the criticisms, again, that I had is when Annie M takes her to the asylum, and it's obviously not a nice place, Annie M leaves her, right? And I was like, she's not even going to stay the night. She knows exactly what's going to happen. But when you think the world that they set up, when Annie M sits Dorothy down and says, we can't make mortgage payments. We're having to get money from my sister to be able to take you to this electroshock therapy place. Would it have cost Annie M money to stay there overnight? And that's why she had to leave, because they didn't have the money for it.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
So the way that I just kept trying to refocus and think, what is the world that's being set up here, and how am I supposed to? And like I said, the movie was very dreary, but that might be how Dorothy just pictures. She can't picture anything else. That's just how it is, because she can't get sleep. She can't get Oz out of her mind. She sees the yellow brick road completely tattered and torn up. That's just her mindset. It is an ugly world. And it is scary, because that's how she's able to process it. The other thing that I like better in this than in Wizard of Oz is I mentioned that I could tell it was guys in costumes. The tik-tok character, when Jack Pumpkinhead shows up for the first time, my brain was like, how did they do that? How are they making tik-tok walk like that? Is there a guy in there? Is it like Kenny Baker in the R2-D2 suit? And how, when Pumpkinhead starts moving, yeah, I get that they could get somebody in a suit to kind of walk in there. But the way that he moves when she's able to put him back together and they're trying to sneak around the gold mirror room, the way that he moves, I thought, how did they do that? Like, I don't know if that's an animatronic. I don't know if they just got, like Slender Man to play that character. So yeah, I like the characters better in this, and the Wheelers were eerie, and Princess Mombi, the way that she's able to switch those heads.
Yeah.
Did you
is that the scene that traumatized you as a kid? Is that the one that you're talking about?
Well,
Scene?
we're almost there. When she goes in and she's able to switch the heads, and you see all the heads lined up, and they're all like looking at Dorothy as she passes. What I like is when you can see Mombi reach in and take a head off of the platform, and it was like, how did they do that? Because it really looks. I don't know how they did that. The scene that did traumatize me, how she takes her upstairs or whatever, and that's where you get the gump and all that. Just the way that they have the plan, she has to go get the ruby key to be able to find the elixir of life, or the, whatever the dust is to wake the gump. She, when she goes in there and she opens room 30, the door 34, which is the room that she was locked in at the asylum. So of course that would be the door that she has to get into. And the way she reaches in and knocks over, and all of a sudden, that the head wakes up and tries to bite her and starts yelling at her. And all the heads in that hallway just start shrieking at the top of their lungs. And then it cuts, and you just see a long shot of the Mombi body, like it sits up really fast, right? And starts looking around. And so your first reaction is, holy crap. Like when you're a kid, you're like, what? And so that's what ingrained in my head. And she's chasing after them, and she puts the regular head on. What did you think about, as an adult, having not seen that movie as a kid? How did that scene work for you? What did you think of that part?
Yeah, I enjoyed that part. I think that was kind of fun. I like the head switching. I thought that was interesting and kind of fun to watch. It didn't scare me, but I don't think it would. But I still thought it was really well done. That was good.
Okay, so that's good. That's one of the things that I was afraid of. I think when we were talking about the episode last time, I thought, oh no, is Jonny, because he's an adult and he hasn't seen this, is that something that he's going to be able to appreciate? So I'm glad you're able to do that. Did you find the Wheelers creepy at all?
I was going to mention that was the first thing that actually I took notice of. I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of some cool characters suddenly. And it kind of reminded me of Labyrinth. That's why I brought Labyrinth up, because it reminded me of the characters that pull their heads off, and and being in the labyrinth and all that. But I thought they were pretty fun characters. I liked it.
So let me ask you a question on that. The whole point of NostalgiaCast is taking movies that affected us as kids. The way that people rejected the darkness and the twisted nature of this movie, not just from the outset, but all the way through, do you think that's what affected people's opinion of this movie? Did you think that the 39 Oz colored their their impression of this movie.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what happened, because it happened to me. I was having the same questions. I was like, well, why is she younger? Why are things different? Why can't it, why are the characters, why do they look different? Why does the Tin Man look different? Why does the lion look different? Why does the Scarecrow look different? That was questions I kept having. So I definitely think that kind of tainted people's view of the sequel.
Right. I think that, is kind of unfair. I think when, like we said, you push it as a direct sequel, that kind of gives you an idea of what to expect from the movie. And this movie does not give them what they expect, which is interesting because it's a lot more faithful to the Baum books than to the actual movie. I know that, say, Sherlock Holmes, people have an affinity for that, when he's in his deerstalker cap and he's smoking the pipe and he says, "Elementary, my dear Watson." People, like when the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock came out, people didn't like it. They're like, this isn't Basil Rathbone. This isn't the Sherlock Holmes. But when you look into it, the Sherlock Holmes of the Arthur Conan Doyle stories, he never wore a deerstalker cap. He never smoked that pipe. So where that came from was the movies. And so it's funny that these critics would watch this and be all snooty and go, "I know Sherlock Holmes and this isn't Sherlock Holmes. I'm familiar with the books." And it's like, no, you're not, because if you were, you would know that all that stuff comes from the actual Hound of the Baskervilles movie that they were in. So, but I think it's kind of unfair when you have to go back. Even watching Batman Begins, we took some people to see him, and they have the original storyline where it's Joe Chill that kills Thomas and Martha Wayne, and we left the movie, and I think it was probably one of your sisters, maybe Kathy or something like. But we walked out, and the question was, how come it wasn't Joker that killed Batman's parents? And I think that's when my head fell off. Anyway, so I think these things come out and they color your opinion of what something should be, and I think that's a problem. Think about that.
Yeah, I think that it has a lot to do with it. Yeah, hearing you mention Sherlock Holmes reminded me of the time when we were driving back from a Sundance film. I'm not sure what we saw, but we were driving home, and we had like an hour and a half drive together. So we were talking about movies, and you asked me what I thought of the new Sherlock Holmes movie. And I think my response was, I really liked it. And you were like that wasn't enough for you. So you had to kind of like go into it a lot more detail. And you talked for the whole rest of the way home about what you thought about Sherlock Holmes. And I sat there going, oh my gosh, is he ever going to shut up? But anyway, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because that reminded me of that story when I was like, I liked it. And you were like, well, here's why I liked it.
Well, I'm sorry. I know a lot of people that are. I know a lot of people that are listening to this podcast and watching this video. They're probably saying the same thing. They're like, "When is he going to shut up?" And then the other guy talk. Anyway, so speaking of talking, we talked about in Transformers the movie where there were some lines that actually most of the lines of Transformers. I don't know if it's because I grew up on that cartoon as a kid, but a lot of the dialogue in the movie I was impressed by. We talked about how your kids would be watching a show in another room, and just the dialogue, your ears would start bleeding, or you'd start getting an aneurysm because it doesn't work with your brain. And I like some of the dialogue in here. Again, with Dorothy, the part where they strap her to the gurney, and she's like, "I'd rather sit up if that's okay." And Nurse Wilson is like, "No, we have to strap you down in case you fall off." And Dorothy goes, "Well, I came here on a carriage. Like, I didn't fall off of that." And they have nothing to say. I like later when they're trying to, as soon as Mombi wakes up, she runs up to the room where the Gump and Jack and tik-tok are, and tik-tok is going nuts. And so she has to wind him, and she's, "Oh no, his brain isn't working." And Jack goes, "Well, if his brain wasn't working, how is he able to talk?" And she goes, "It happens to people all the time, Jack." Yeah. Or later when even the Gump had a good line, when they land, I think when they land on the Gnome Mountain or whatever, and the Gump is walking off, and he goes, "I should have quit when I was ahead." And I was like, oh. Oh, I get that. So again, there's a lot of stuff in here that's adult and that works. Were there any other dialogue bits that you were impressed by, or actually, were there any parts of this movie that you thought were like, that is pretty impressive? I wasn't expecting it to do that.
Yeah, you kind of already brought it up. I really liked tik-tok. I liked the way he moved. I like that. For some reason, that character fascinated me. I know Deep Roy is in the movie somewhere. Is he the Tin Man?
He's a Tin Man, so he's probably in the body. Up in the legs.
that impressed me. I liked tik-tok. I thought that was a fun character. But yeah, overall, I thought it was pretty well done. I don't know if I would ever want to watch it again. Maybe if my kids wanted to watch it, I might sit and watch it with them because, like I say, it is kind of dark. But for the most part, I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, why don't it just didn't hit you in a certain way, and that's why you wouldn't want to watch it again? Is that why, or were there specific reasons?
Well, I don't think I really need to watch it again. Like, I feel like I got the gist of what it's doing. It's not one of those movies where I want to put it in and study it. I get it. I get what they did. I understand what they were trying to do. I can appreciate it on that level. There were some entertaining parts. I liked the production design. I liked the darkness of it. But I don't need to watch it again. I don't really have a desire to go watch it again. And you know what I mean? I don't really see a point or a need.
Right. Okay.
So.
And well, let me ask you this: the movie is not. For me, it went by really fast. They don't really go to a lot of. They're in the farm the first time. They go to the asylum. She's in Oz. She meets tik-tok and the Wheelers. The Wheelers tell her to go to Mombiis. They go to Mombiis. They escape from Mombiis because they find out the Gnome King is keeping the Scarecrow captive. So they escape and they go to the Gnome Mountain and they encounter him there. And then that's basically the movie. She gets the ruby slippers back. She taps her feet. Everything's back to normal. It's not that complicated. There's not. We've covered some episodic movies before, but I think it didn't go to too many places that I thought it was a problem. I thought it went by pretty fast.
Well, I would agree with that. Once they got to Oz, in the beginning, I feel like it was dragged a little bit. It was a little slow going in the beginning, and maybe it was because the music was throwing me off. So I was kind of like wishing that part away. You know what I mean? So I would say that once they got to Oz, it kind of had a flow and it kind of like went, but getting up to that point was kind of slow going for me.
Okay. And what did you think? We talked about claymation last time, and we mentioned the name Will Vinton. He didn't do the claymation for Better Off Dead for the hamburger parts, but he did supervise and did do the claymation here. So he did the faces on the rocks. He did the gnomes later. He did obviously the Gnome King. What did you think of those effects?
Yeah, they're pretty good. I mean, for the time, I thought it was really good. And again, it reminded me of Labyrinth and movies like that.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point, is because the critics who were, they didn't vibe with the movie. They didn't like it. They thought it was too dark. A year later, Labyrinth comes out, and it was a whole different. Oh, this is great, and it has a lot of the same themes, a lot of the same scariness, a lot of the same edge. David Bowie is like a Gnome King. That's his character. That you could swap places with him. It'd be the same basic arc for them. I really liked like I said, the rocks. It worked. I was like, is that CGI? It can't be CGI because that wasn't a big thing yet. I thought it animation-wise, it was very persuasive. I liked how the Gnome King, and again, he's kind of played by Nicole Williamson. He seems like a nice guy, but he's very menacing. He's very sinister. And so the way that he gets them to go all and guess who the Scarecrow could be, and I like the effect of how he started becoming more and more human, like as the scene progressed.
Yeah, I like that.
And then the scene at the end where Dorothy, obviously, that's kids' logic. Like, of course it would be Emerald because they come from the Emerald City. Why wouldn't that be? And watching it with our kids, we sat down, we had Spencer and Micah watch it, and they were enraptured by it. They were laughing at all the right parts. They were scared and unnerved, like the scary parts with the Wheelers or Mombi. Micah came over and he sat with me, but he was just transfixed on it. And the part I thought Mombi would be the scariest for him, but it was actually the Gnome King that Micah said really scared him. Like that was the most. So I just think watching it from a kid's eyes, I appreciated that they were laughing at the parts they were supposed to laugh at. They were intimidated by the characters when they first came out. They were kind of frightened by these adults that they had powers that weren't familiar and all that. With the Gnome King being allergic to chickens.
Yeah.
And we talk about all the time, the egg coming down. Would you count that as a deus ex machina? Would you count that as one of those?
Yeah, I think so. But I do like that it's the egg that saves the day. I like that. Because the whole time she couldn't lay an egg, and then it ends up being the chicken's egg that kills the Gnome King, which is great, I think.
Well, the thing that's good with the egg is it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's like he's afraid of chickens for some reason. Like that's there. And then at the beginning, Dorothy mentions that Bellina is not laying eggs. And so they plant the seeds for that. If you go, I don't believe in the 39 Wizard of Oz that the witches weakness to water. I don't think that was a thing. I think Dorothy threw it on her by accident. It was, oh, look at that. It melts her. That was fortunate.
They never set that up either. They never gave you any kind of foreshadowing that the water was going to kill the witch at the end. You never got anything to lead towards that. So it kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah. So I don't think it's God in the machine so much as, with Harry Potter, my problem, like we said, beside the look of it, the first two movies, Harry solves the problem by, he doesn't know what he does. Like, he's talking to the coral and he just accidentally touches his hand and the hand melts off, and then he touches his face. And Harry's like, well, that worked. Nice. And so he talks to Dumbledore later and he's like, well, why did that work? He's like, oh, probably the power of love or something. I don't know. And then in the second one, they're in the Chamber of Secrets, and the Phoenix brings him this. He's about to be bitten by the snake or whatever, and the Phoenix comes and drops him the sword. It's like, oh, well, that was easy. Like, Harry doesn't solve the problem. He has this thing come in and save him. And while I don't think the egg is quite that, it is convenient that the chicken just happens to be in Jack's head.
Yeah, it's still not Dorothy solving the problem, though. So it kind of is the same. But
it does tie in with, if you were to take the theme of the movie, I think the theme of the movie would be trauma and how are you able to overcome that. Dorothy, by going back to Oz and getting purpose and saving, the world again, and, and being able to put Princess Ozma back in her rightful place, it gives Dorothy purpose. The chicken, even though, it scares her enough being eaten by the Gnome King to lay an egg, so that gets her over her trauma. When Dorothy goes back to Kansas, there's a literal shot of Uncle Henry running into frame, and his leg is busted. He runs into frame, sees Dorothy, throws his cane away, and he's walking and he's running and he picks her up, and he's normal because he has a purpose. It's kind of enlivened him. And when it's all is said and done, it cuts into the future a little bit, and he's building the house, and now everything's back to normal, and they're building it back up. Even though the egg doesn't tie in with anything Dorothy does, it does tie in with that theme of the movie of overcoming your trauma to defeat your problems. And so, like we talked about, the ending to when the Emerald City is back in its rightful place and it's garish, and I got heavy Labyrinth vibes from that. I got Star Wars vibes from it too. You know how tik-tok is all shined up again for the ceremony, like C-3PO was? When Dorothy goes back to Kansas and she's in the room and she sees Princess Ozma come into the mirror, that's again very Labyrinth, right? Wasn't that a shot from Labyrinth where she looks and she sees her friends in a mirror and she turns around and they're not there?
Doesn't the mirror shatter or something like that?
I can't remember. Labyrinth we talked about it in that episode. That's one of the movies that I wouldn't ever need to see again because I got enough out of it. But I also got shades. I had a glimpse of when she sees it in the mirror and she turns the mirror up. I got shades of Taxi Driver for some reason, because the whole movie of Taxi Driver is Travis Bickle, and you don't know if the ending's a fantasy or not, but he's in his taxi and you think he's back to normal and he's got a hold of his demons, and you have the sound design. The sound comes in and he sees his reflection in the mirror and he turns the mirror away, the very last shot. So he's able to kind of focus away. And I don't think that they're trying to compare Return to Oz to Taxi Driver. But I just think that she's able to, she's able to compartmentalize Oz, and she's able to keep it to herself and not like weird people out who don't understand it. And I like how Annie M comes in and goes, why don't you play outside? And the last shot is of Dorothy acting like a kid. She's running around with Toto.
I did like, too, that the house that was falling apart that they had to rebuild was rebuilt. So, like, everything's been healed, so to speak. I like that.
Yeah. And even though, magically things happen, it doesn't, the uncle just needs to get over himself. Dorothy just needs to get over herself. The chicken needs to get over itself and just act normal and not be traumatized by all these things that happen. It's hard. And I don't know if they earn that so much. There's nothing in the movie that tells me, oh, this is my learning moment, right? I know it just gradually happens to them.
Yeah.
So, did you have any other notes? I think that's everything that I have. I mean, looking at, yeah.
Well, you talked about, when you sent me that text about comparing it to a classic movie, what makes a movie a classic movie? You want to talk about that, or you want to do that later?
I think we'll do that after the segment. I think we'll talk about that because I think I sent you a list of titles and you sent me a list back.
Yeah.
So we'll do that after the break. But, just let's go to the worth remembering or worth a remake. I would say this is worth remembering. I know that Wizard of Oz is, weighs heavy on a lot of people's minds. But, like we talked about, Wizard of Oz didn't really do it for me. I'm not going to be one of those people that says Wizard of Oz is one of the stupidest movies I've ever seen. I don't understand why people like it. And if you like it, you're an idiot. And your mom's an idiot for showing you that, I don't want to be one of those people. I get why it's impressive. I like I said, I just think I saw it too late. The magic in the movie, I know there's magic there, but it's not my kind of thing. It just didn't work for me. And I don't think this movie is magical, but I think that Murch is able to create a world where I believe that tik-tok is an actual being. I believe that Jack Pumpkinhead is not a human. And later, you see that it's a guy in a suit, and he starts being more realistic. When they wake up the Scarecrow, he's acting just like the Scarecrow of the old movie. It reminded me of when Will Turner is doing the Jack Sparrow impression in the first Pirates of the Caribbean. It reminded me of that. He's all like, but it did remind me of that. I like too that the Cowardly Lion looked like a lion instead of an idiot. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to do that, but I ended up doing it instead of a guy in a suit. The world is just I believed in this world. The darkness, as an adult, the darkness worked for me. And there are parts that gave me chills. I don't think the Mombi part scared me as much as it did back when I was a kid. But I get the way that it's shot and the way that it's edited together, it's very well done. It does give you that feeling. My kids were huddling up, and Spencer had the blanket over his head over that part. And it is about something. I don't think it's very clear about how it talks about trauma, but it is there. There is a theme to it. So yeah, I mean, like you talked about, I don't really think I ever need to see another Oz movie. I don't need to see another Alice in Wonderland movie. I don't need to see another Never-Ending Story, because I get everything I need from that world, and I got everything from this. It was very persuasive. I liked the design. I liked the look of everything. By the end, I believed in everything that was going on, and there was an actual feeling of, hey, it's great that she's able to overcome her problems and be a kid again. So definitely worth remembering.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, for me, like I mentioned, I hadn't seen it, and so I was reluctant to see it because of what I knew from The Wizard of Oz. I really didn't want to watch another Wizard of Oz movie. But like I also mentioned, it started to grow on me. I started to appreciate what they were doing. I liked the darkness of it. I liked the world they were building. I liked a few of the characters. I didn't mention this, though. There's one thing that I remember that actually made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was just Dorothy trying to wind up tik-tok, and she's obviously not winding anything. She's just moving her hand like this. Like you can see her hand just doing this. And that made me laugh. But anyway, things like that kept showing up and making me kind of giggle. And so I appreciated it. And in the end, I think I would say worth remembering, even though I don't need to watch it again. I probably won't watch it again unless my kids are watching and I happen to walk in the room. But yeah, overall, it was an enjoyable movie.
Okay. Well, it did its job, right? You don't need to see it again or anything like it because, well, I bought that world. Is that what you're saying, basically?
Yeah, it's not like one of those movies where you have to watch it again. Like, there are some movies where you watch it, you're going to watch that again. You're going to start studying that movie. You're going to you want to live in that world more often. This one, I don't really need to. I still appreciate it, and I overall enjoyed it, but I don't need to watch it again.
Okay, I'll take that. I like that viewpoint. So, again, we mentioned it. We talked a little bit about classics and what makes a classic movie, what doesn't. So let's take a little bit of a break. Go, I don't know, twirl around in the backyard, play with our own Toto dog. Kind of relax a little bit, and we'll be right back.
Nothing, just a reflection.
What is it, Dorothy?
So that was our look back at Return to Oz. You mentioned before we went to break that we all have movies that people consider classics that don't quite jibe with this the same way. I sent you a text message saying, let's talk about this. I've got these 3 titles. Wizard of Oz was one of them. And then if you could come back with 3 titles of your own, let's kind of talk about that and see if we can make enemies. So anyway, so the list that I have, I think we'll just go back and forth just so we don't have people's hate like building too much for both of us at the same time. But the first one I have is The Wizard of Oz. I think I mentioned that the magic just didn't work for me. I was too old when I saw it. But again, I appreciate the artistry and the technique that went into it. We don't need to delve anymore. We did that during the episode. What was your first title that you wanted to talk about?
All right. Well, when I got your text, I quickly just like jokingly wrote back that my top 3 movies that I didn't understand that were classics were Citizen Kane, Field of Dreams, and Jaws. Only because I know those are some of your favorite movies. But of course, I was joking. That's not true. My first.
Yeah. What did I say? What did I say to that text message? How did I respond to it? Did I respond nicely?
I think it was like, "I hate you" or something like that.
Well, that's a given. Anyway, what was your first title?
So, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I put that because even though I know it was groundbreaking and some of the things they did with it, and I saw it when I was really young. I was maybe 7 or 8 when I saw it for the first time, and it was just lost on me. I didn't understand what was going on, and I haven't seen it since. So maybe that's why. If I watched it again, maybe I'd appreciate it more. But I just was bored. I was so bored watching that movie when I was a kid. So, yeah, I know it's a classic. I understand that they did the whole rotating set and all that. And I understand, the groundbreaking things they did. But like I say, maybe I got to watch it again. Maybe I might appreciate it. Maybe we'll do it for an episode or something like that.
Maybe. Well, I hear a lot about this. I know my friend Rachel on Twitter. She does a podcast, being a female critic in a toxic age, and one of her episodes of this, the film critic she had on, they also talked about 2001 and how it didn't work for them, but how they appreciated the artistry of that. What I think of 2001, it's obviously my favorite. I haven't mentioned on here, but it is my favorite science fiction movie of all time, just because of I think science fiction's about ideas, but and that one's full of ideas. But the thing that always comes to mind when people mention they don't like 2001 is that movies are Rorschach tests, or they can be Rorschach tests. You show them like an image, or you show them something, and they get a different meaning out of it. It doesn't make sense if you have a Rorschach blot and you say, well, that looks like a dustbuster, and somebody else looks at it and goes, well, that looks like a coffee mug. Are you going to get mad at that other person and say, your opinion sucks, it's not a coffee mug? Is that what you're going to do?
Well, if you're a jerk, maybe you would.
I might, but you get what I'm saying. It doesn't make sense, especially like Kubrick. I don't think Kubrick, even Dr. Strangelove, which is his most audience-friendly movie, even that has a lot going on in it, and some people don't find it very funny. Kubrick is a very divisive filmmaker, and 2001 might be his most divisive film, especially when people call it a classic. Other people hear that and they go, oh, hold on, I didn't really like it. But it is good that you're able to appreciate that artistry. I think that's the difference here. The second movie that I have, again, going back and watching all those 90s movies, another movie that didn't do it for me was The Streetcar Named Desire with Marlon Brando. And I haven't seen the play. I know we've talked about plays in the podcast before. Is that a Tennessee Williams play? That is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I've read the play, but I've never seen it. If you have never seen it.
I just thought it was very shrill, and it was a bunch of yelling, and I didn't really get the point of it. I didn't like any of the characters, which I get is kind of the purpose of the play, but I just think that it rubbed me the absolute wrong way. I didn't like anybody there. I didn't care that they were going through these issues. My whole thought was, well, you deserve it. And so it's hard, it's hard to, but again, Marlon Brando, he's amazing in that movie. You're not going to say, well, the acting is horrible. There's not something you can say about the movie. I just think it didn't, it's just one of those movies that maybe I would like it in play form. Maybe it didn't translate as well in movie form. I don't know. So I really can't explain it more than that. I don't know if Streetcar is a movie that, and I know it's still running on what was Broadway before COVID hit. I know it was still a running show. So I know it's revered, but the movie just didn't do it for me. What was your second title? Or your second title?
Yeah, number 2 was Lawrence of Arabia. And the reason, again, why I picked that one is I was also really young. I walked into the room. My dad was watching it. And I sat down and I watched the whole thing with him. And I remember just, again, being super bored. Like, it just never ended. It's 3.5 hours long, right? But I just was like, is this ever going to end? When's it going to be over? Like, and I was really young. So, again, I might need to watch it again to fully appreciate it. But as of right now, it's another one of those movies I think of where I think I don't understand why people like that movie.
Well, I think that's a movie that you if it ever comes in a revival, or I think what they're doing now showing older movies, that's a movie that you need to see on a good 70 millimeter print on a giant screen to really appreciate what David Lean was doing with it. If you see it on a small television screen, it might not be as...
And that's how I experienced it for the first time, yeah.
And so the T.S. Lawrence, I don't know if I'm getting that right, the protagonist of that movie, did you saw it when you were young. Is that something that you jived with as a kid? Did you find him an interesting character? T.E. Lawrence, I think is his name.
I mean, no, not at all. Like, all I remember is they were in the desert the entire time, and I was bored. That's all I remember is being bored.
Okay. Yeah, and like I said, if it ever comes in a revival version, maybe we should go see that and see if you have a different kind of opinion of that. The third movie that I have, and again, being Halloween, this might be controversial, is I've never been scared by The Exorcist.
Okay.
It's one of those movies that's, like we talked about last time, that you can see an image from it and you know exactly where it's from. It's ingrained in your mind, even if you've never seen it. And maybe by definition, that's what a classic is. It's indelible. It's wormed its way into everybody's consciousness. I just think maybe like Wizard of Oz, by the time we saw it, not in a theater, not in the 70s, seeing it at home, we were able to turn the lights on. My wife and I, we sat down thinking this is going to be the most terrifying thing ever. And I just thought, personally, I thought it was very stagey and obvious the way they did a lot of stuff, and the smoke coming out of Linda Blair's mouth, things like that. It didn't. We watched it and we were like, what's the big deal with this? I mean, I get, devil and Satanism and all this stuff and possession is scary, but I think I can see the seams. It's not technically impressive to me. And then when we did that, we read just right after, we didn't understand. So we decided to read the actual true story that the movie was based on. And just reading the story of it, we got more chills and we're more scared of that than watching the actual movie. Are you an Exorcist fan?
I had the same experience that you had. I didn't see it for the longest time, and then finally a friend of mine decided just to go watch it, just to get it out of the way. And we sat down, watched it, and again, the same kind of reaction. I was like, what's so scary about this? Like, this isn't scary at all. I mean, I guess it was a little bit creepy when her head turns around and she starts to vomit, but it's just kind of like, so you go, that wasn't really that scary. You know what I mean? So I had the same experience you did.
Okay. But, I get that I think I've tweeted about that it didn't scare me, and people that grew up with a religious background or a Catholic background, it did terrify them when they were growing up. So I don't begrudge anybody that reaction. Obviously, the movie that terrified me, which you said you hated, jerk, Jaws, that's a movie that affects me on a very primal level, but it doesn't scare people if you're not scared of the water. So I think with horror, it's a different story. It's like we talked about, it's very subjective. I think we had that conversation during our Frighteners episode.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was your third title?
Well, I couldn't really think of a third one, but I did think of one that I've never actually gotten through all the way, and that's Last of the Mohicans. I've tried to watch this movie a half a dozen times, and I always fall asleep after about 20 minutes in. I can't stay awake in this movie. I don't know what it is. It puts me to sleep. Maybe it's the music. It puts me to sleep. So eventually one day I'll watch it. But as of right now, it's one that I hear people talk about, and they say how great it is. And I'm like, I can't even get to the first 20 minutes. I can't even. So anyway, so that's why it's on my list. However, I'm sure I would probably appreciate it on some level. Again, all these ones I picked are ones that I probably need to watch again because I saw them when I was very young, or I haven't seen them all the way through.
Okay. Well, with Last of the Mohicans, the music is very, I guess you could call it Enya-ish.
Yeah.
It's going to kind of put you in a mood. I know that's a movie in high school. We have a mutual friend, Jenny. She just adored that movie, and she
Yeah.
saw things in it that I didn't. I think with that movie, maybe, I mean, the characters in that movie are fairly paper thin. They're not that deep. To me, Last of the Mohicans is just a very visceral, action-driven movie, and even though there's not going on, to me, it gets to my brain. I don't know what it is. So, but your point of view saying it kind of puts you to sleep. Do you think the characters do they not engage you? Is that something that
I don't know what it is, but like I say, I've tried at least 6 or 7 times to watch it, and I fall asleep every time. So we'll see what happens. Maybe I'll try again sometime. And we'll see if I can get through it.
Well, the thing is, you're mentioning movies like 2001's obviously very big with film scholars. What was this? I'm having a mind. My mind just went blank. What was the second movie that you mentioned? Lawrence of Arabia. That's a movie that you mentioned that, and people. Well, obviously you're not a film scholar. You know, you didn't like. But the way that you describe it, the way that I feel I describe Wizard of Oz, I don't want to attack these movies and take away people's appreciation for them. I do appreciate what they're trying to do. Movies are Rorschach tests. They're gonna affect everybody in different ways. So I can't begrudge people that have a different experience than I have. So I like the way that we're able to talk about it. I hope we haven't made enemies. I know there's going to be some people that listen to this and just automatically I believe the word is cancel us. That's what the kids are saying these days. But you know, when you talk about these movies, you got to respect other people's opinions. That's our whole thing with NostalgiaCast, right? We don't want to take it and say Labyrinth didn't work for either of us, but it worked for your wife. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's why we brought her on. It's like, I don't want to just be a negative attack this movie session. I want to have a viewpoint that I can see what's going on and understand.
Yeah. So, and I think we accomplished that when we had her on. I think we did that.
Okay. And hopefully that's what we accomplish all the time when we talk about all these movies. Hopefully we're not offending anybody. We just want to have conversations. Are there movies that for everybody listening or watching, are there movies out there that you know are classics but you don't like? Are there movies that we've covered that we thought were worth remembering that you thought we were crazy, we didn't know what we were talking about? Feel free to comment below, either the audio or the video version.
Yeah, tell us why you hate Citizen Kane, Field of Dreams, and Jaws.
Those comments I'll erase. I'm just telling you right now. No, feel free to comment on those. I understand, like we talked about with Citizen Kane, what's the big deal with the ceiling, right? I mean, no, you have to. There's no have to here. You just approach it in a different way as long as we're respectful to each other. Absolutely let us know. But yeah, so I guess that'll wrap everything up on classics, on our trip to Oz, Dorothy Gale, all of that. What movie did you have for us next week?
Well, we invited a guest on. I told you we're going to have a guest, and so we're going to let our guest pick the movie. And he picked. We talked about it. Never Ending Story. Never Ending Story. Sorry.
So basically, what he's doing is we just did a movie where it was the fantasy travel subgenre, and he's picked a movie that's going to be the same genre. So, man, that's just like him. That's just like him to annoy us like that.
Well, he was either going to pick Braveheart or Narnia, and then he kind of finally went with Never Ending Story because it kind of fits the theme of our podcast better than those other two do. So
okay, yeah, and again, it's on our banner. I've had conversations with people on Twitter about maybe guesting with us before. I don't want people to think that our friend is taking precedence over that. We have talked about him in our our Few Good Men episode. We did mention him. Maybe we'll go into that a little bit more. But I think having him on will be great because I want to make sure that we're still ironing out bugs, and he's a good guinea pig for that. So it'll be great to have him on. But absolutely, let's talk about Never Ending Story. Let's get that one out of the way, and we'll see what we have to say about that.
All right, sounds good.
So did you want to wish anybody any spooky Halloween wishes or anything to say or anything to talk about the world in general? Anything you want to say?
Happy Halloween, I guess.
Oh, all right.
I didn't know you were going to do that.
I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out a creative way to go out, but I guess that's the best we're going to do. But yeah, happy Halloween, everybody. I hope everybody's staying safe. Obviously, for Halloween, wearing a mask, it's just going to be natural for you. So, yeah. So everybody, I hope you have a good, safe holiday. Until next time, I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And we'll catch you on the flip side.